want to tell you a Bible story this morning, one that you can read for yourself in 2 Kings chapter 5. The story of Naaman, told from his perspective. My name is Naaman. Let me tell you my story. I hail from the mighty country of Aram. I was a powerful warrior and commander of the king's army. I was highly esteemed by the king himself and respected by many. I won great victories for my country, but there was one thing that I could not overcome. I had a hideous and agonizing skin disease. I couldn't change it or cure it. Nothing I did could make a difference. Despite my position and rank, I was ashamed because of my disease. But I have been on the receiving end of the healing and life offered by the living God. My army had been in battle with Israel, and among the people they captured was a young girl. She became servant to my wife. One day the girl spoke with courage to my wife. She said, I wish my master would see the prophet who is in Samaria. He would cure him of his leprosy. When I think back on all that she endured at my hands, being torn away from her family, forced to live in a foreign land, she would have had every right to hate me and to despise my wife. Yet she showed incomprehensible love. I believe now that it was because of her deep faith in the God of love himself that she was able to show such compassion to me. She sought what was best for me. Rather than seeking revenge for the pain I had caused her, she knew that her God was in control despite the circumstances. She knew that her God is a God of grace, a God of love, a God of healing, a God of mercy, and that he calls his followers to be the same. I've witnessed that God does not need powerful people, just simple, ordinary people who trust him completely. This Israelite servant was an ordinary girl who believed in an extraordinary God. I am forever grateful to her. When I heard what she said, hope began to stir in me. Perhaps this girl's God could save me, could heal me. But would he welcome me, an outsider? I was an enemy of Israel, had fought, killed and captured this God's people. Why would he want to heal me? I went to the king of Aram and told him what the servant girl had said. He gave me his blessing to go on this journey, even writing a letter on my behalf to the king of Israel. I ladened myself with gifts of wealth to pay for my cure. When I reached Israel and handed over the letter, I could see the king's face drop and fill with worry and dread. He tore his robes and said, "Am I God? Why does he send someone to me to be cured of his leprosy? Surely he's trying to pick a fight with me." He was afraid that if he could not heal me, it would lead to conflict, lead to more destruction and devastation of his country through attack by the army that I was in control of. But then came a message to the king from the prophet Elisha. This man of God said to the king, "Why are you so upset? Send the man to me, and he will learn that there is a true prophet here in Israel." Elisha saw the king's lack of faith in God being able to heal an incurable disease. Not only did Elisha trust in the power of God, but he saw this as an opportunity to preach the one true God to those seemingly beyond God's reach. So I stood before Elisha's door, ready to meet this man who could heal my disease and restore me to wholeness, reinstate my pride and honour. Little did I know at that point that it was more than my physical body that needed to be healed. I expected Elisha to be waiting for me, to have heard my approach, heard the sound of horses and chariots keenly moving towards his home. I expected him to greet me as befit my rank, to stand before me, to call on the name of his gods, and to wave his hand over my skin and heal me. But I was mistaken. Instead, he sent a servant to me, a servant, who told me to go and wash my body 7 times in the River Jordan. I was enraged, and I made that known. I spoke out my expectations and belittled the waters of Israel, saying, "Aren't the rivers of Aram much better than all the waters of Israel? Why couldn't I wash in them and be cleansed?" I began to leave. I thank God that my servants stopped me and pointed out the truth. "My father," they said, "if the prophet had told you to do some great thing, would you not have done it? Why not humble yourself and do this simple thing? Wash and be cleansed and trust the word of this man of God." I went to the River Jordan, down into the water, and dipped myself 7 times, and my life was changed. My shame was removed, my body was made whole, and my spirit came to life. I cannot express the joy I felt when I came up out of the water and saw that my body had been healed. I was clean. And not only my body, but something inside of me had been cleansed by God's grace. I learned that only by coming to the very end of yourself can one experience God's grace. Only those who realise they cannot attain grace and forgiveness and healing by their own efforts can be made whole by God. Once I experienced this overwhelming power, presence, and mercy of God, my whole attitude changed. No longer am I an outsider. I went back to the prophet Elisha, humble and repentant of my earlier behaviour and accusations. I went back to thank him. I stood before him and said, "Now I know that there is no God in all the world except in Israel." He would not accept any of my gifts. I've learned you cannot buy God's grace. All the wealth and riches in the world cannot buy God's healing, reconciliation, or mercy. It can only be received as a gift. Elisha too knew that God's grace cannot be bought, that earthly wealth holds no real power. God is a God of mystery. His plans and purposes are not easily understood by human minds. Yet I am grateful that his plan included me, that he was and is at work in the hearts, minds, and lives of those who choose to follow him and trust him, that his presence transforms and makes us whole.